Okay, I think we should start. First of all, let's check that people are expecting what they're expecting. This is a session called Communicating Teaching Statistics. I'm Jim Ridgway, so I'm just kind of chairing the session, so you won't hear much. If we go back to the sort of early history of RSS and the early history of ASA, you see this group of people with very different interests coming together to kind of solve practical problems. So if you look at the early membership, John Pullinger's produced a very nice summary document about the early days of the RSS. And you see people coming from very different backgrounds in economics, biology, obviously agriculture, psychology, people like Galton, coming together with practical problems to be addressed and resolved, and then inventing some mathematics to do it and wrangling with facts. If you look at the state of school statistics, it doesn't really reflect this notion of wrangling with interesting problems, and it certainly doesn't reflect the notion of inventing mathematics to solve them. And the kind of criticisms that have been made for quite a long time, sort of both here, the USA, and other places, is that the problem with school statistics and some introductory courses in statistics at the university level are characterised by getting people to master statistical technique, often using toy data sets, and then essentially doing nothing with it. So in a sense, what's the result? What's the point of having a result from a toy data set other than to say, hey, I can know the toy data set's not great. So a lot of people are saying, well, come on, there are really important issues out there. We've got the responsibility to educate people about ways to handle more complex evidence, more complex information. The downside of that is that as soon as you start talking about real data sets, then you have the issues of the fact things are put together, surprise. You have measurement issues. How do you define poverty? How do you define, well, anything? You see kinds of numbers that you don't see in other places. So you see indicators used for things. So GDP, Gini, all these sorts of things. So there's a slew of statistical ideas that we don't really encounter in introductory courses. Interactions are common, non-linearity is common. So we're simply saying, well, okay, if we want to, these are important ideas, we need to expose students to them. So how are we going to do it? Okay, so people are looking at around the world, people are looking at ways to reform the curriculum. So in the UK, what has happened is since 2017, there's been the idea of having a pre-release large data set that students will work with, so they're working with authentic data, they're doing sensible things with that. So we are trying to change the way that, change the kind of heartland of statistics away from mastery techniques with small data sets to bigger ideas. So essentially we're approaching nirvana and what could possibly go wrong, really. We've got to be where we want to be, people with large-scale, realistic data sets. Assessment is always a big theme, because that's what assessment does, is it captures your values, and it makes it really explicit to teachers and students. First of all, what the words mean. So what was problem solving? Well, it means being able to hack this class of examples successfully. Okay, you can think of all sorts of fancy labels about representing problems and blah, blah, blah. But the heartland is, it means you can do this class of problems and come out with this kind of solution. So assessment is critical to actually instantiating the concepts that you're trying to get across. And it's giving very clear guidance to teachers and students about exactly what's valued and exactly what they're going to be rewarded for. Okay, so having set the scene for educational bliss, more problems solved,
necessarily everybody. And so that's just background for people who are not. Can I pass swiftly on? Is everybody familiar with the way the UK works with GCSEs and A-levels? Good. As Jim was saying, we had the introduction of the pre-release large data set. Surely that must be a good thing. You might think so, but there are a few wrinkles. In particular, the techniques which are in the content list for the A-level mathematics are not appropriate for use with the multivariate data set. There's nothing about multivariate data in there. And there aren't any techniques or topics that are in there that I would want to use a large data set to introduce. If I've taught it, I might use it to do things, but for instance, there isn't any estimation in there. If you start looking at hypothesis testing, then there are all sorts of issues about using the same data set, where do you get your hypotheses from, and so on. You know, things like repeated sampling for estimation, but estimation is not in the course at all. And all of the large data sets, each of the boards have their own. All of those large data sets have variables in there that are not the sort of things that the content relates to. So, you know, you've got things like octas for cloud cover, which are pretty, you know, if you start to actually look at what they are, they're really difficult. You've also got things like maximum wind speeds. And if you start doing things with averages for those sorts of data, then there's lots of conceptual obstacles. And one of the difficulties that I think exists as far as teachers are concerned is they lack confidence that they know, that they're comfortable with statistics for themselves and teaching it. And I think some of the contexts that are used really make that a much bigger problem. But not nearly as big as I think some of the assessment issues come in terms of reinforcing teachers' anxiety about what they're trying to teach. One of the other issues is that, I mean, the introduction of this large data set seems to me to fall into the category of a sort of road to Damascus experience amongst examiners, that they've discovered real data. You must have kids working with real data. But they had spent years avoiding using real data, and in fact still avoid using real data, apart from the large data set. So they have no experience of working with real data, and I don't actually think that I think most of them actually don't understand a lot of the issues about working with real data. The other really important part of this is that the only technology that students have in the assessment is a calculator. So they're working with a large data set, but you can't ask them any interesting questions in the examination that would require the use of technology, because all they have, and they have a limited amount of time, all they have is a calculator. And a really, really big issue is that students and teachers have little or no experience in working with real data earlier on in their studies. And that's something that we come into to talk about with Darren later on. So I'm going to show you some examples of your assessment. The choice of these is largely dictated not by these are the worst, but these are short. So I can show you them in one slide. I can't show you Some examples of really bad questions that went on for 3 pages. Modelling. If you look at the blurb about the specification, there are a number of interesting features in it. One is that modelling is supposed to be central. We'll come back to that in a minute. The use of technology is supposed to be central, but yet isn't available in the assessment. And apart from the use of the large data set, apart from questions that relate to the large data set, the examiners do not use real data. One of the examples that I'm going to show you is where they appear to use real data, but they have made the data up. And it's a real problem in this particular question. So, this is one of the questions using the large data set. This is from AQA, and their large data set was from the food survey. So, all the question asks is, that you have to identify which region this is. So these are all the regions in England and Wales. So which region is this? Now it's a multiple choice, but the large data set actually had 10 pages of data for 10 different years. Sorry, for the regions, 10 pages, and they had multiple years, but when you went down the rows, there was something like 110 products. So to produce this graph wouldn't be all that difficult to do it, but you have to go to the 10 pages separately and then stack, compare 2 out of these 110, and you could get that graph, and you could identify which of them it is. So, what is it that this is assessing? Now, actually, if I was going to try and answer that question, I would guess London. Would you have any idea as to why, and it is London, would you have any idea as to why it would be London?
Racial question might be better off people buy more than
And London's better off than everywhere else in the country?
Yeah.
Interesting. But you're talking about the total here being considered
the
less.
ratio.
Well, the ratio, but you're also talking about the total being much less.
They help you as well.
Sorry? This is proportional.
Yeah, okay.
So, yeah, the most populous region.
Because of those regions, London's probably the smallest.
The only explanation that I come up with is the fact that if you look across a whole range of things, London is the one that is very often very different. But I don't actually think if you start going through a lot of those other explanations, I'm not sure that you could conclusively argue that. But certainly it's not appropriate for a question like this that's assessing the use of the large data. You think, well, what is it that we're wanting the kids to do in preparation for getting to grips with the question? So, if you want, I'll read you this. Hospital consultant has 7 appointments every day. The number of these appointments which start late on a randomly chosen day is denoted by L. The variable L is modelled by the distribution B7, 3/8. Show that in this model, the hospital consultant is equally likely to have 2 appointments start late or 3 appointments start late. Can you bear in mind that this is a specification that has an emphasis on modelling? Really, if I asked you to take a couple of minutes and to come up with a context where the modelling was worse than this. So 7 appointments for a single consultant in a day, and you're assuming independence. Can anybody off the top of their head think of a worse context for modelling a binomial? I thought about it for a while. I couldn't.
Flooding houses. Probability of my house being flooded is independent of the probability of the house next door being flooded and so on.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Go get started.
This is the one that I said about real data. So essentially this is the one question in the 2018 World Specimen papers that appeared to use real data. So it gives you some information. It's a Venn diagram type of problem to do conditional probability. You've got enough information there to work out the proportion that get both, and from that you can do your conditional probability. The problem is, those numbers are wrong. Because if you work it out, and most kids, I mean you can do it without working out probability of both. But if you do it that way, and that would be the standard way of doing it, you get 50%. But the only kids who were doing this were doing A-level maths at the end of their first year, because it was a new specification. So it was the bright kids. And they were in that cohort. And there was a lot of interest in the media about it because that was a new GCSE. So how were kids going to go? But it really shouldn't have been big news stories because the government in their infinite wisdom, when they change qualifications, actually impose quotas so that there isn't any major shift in things. But it was quite big news. And it's not a tiny shift. The difference between 50 and 58.5%. So if a kid does the work and gets 50%, knows that it's wrong, what are they going to do? So, if I just pause for a moment and go back, when they were introducing the large data set, I looked at the principles of the pre-release and what the assessment said they had to do. And my view was that it was impossible. It was simply not possible to assess pre-release large data set with the techniques that were there, with the use of technology that wasn't there, and the requirement that it had to be demonstrable that students who had studied the pre-release data set would benefit from that. It seemed to me that virtually the only way you could do that is to be testing factual recall. So I raised issues about this and then wrote a paper for ICOS last year that said I raised this beforehand and said that you should be concerned that nobody had been able to produce an example to show how it would work when it's never been done anywhere in the world. And so, evidence-based. But to go from there to saying, look, I warned that it wouldn't work. This is what the specimen papers look like. And it doesn't work. And and put in some analysis, but at the same time put in a lot of analysis of questions other than the large data set to say, look, there's actually a very serious problem about the way we are assessing statistics. So there's a group has been set up during this last year that have now produced some guiding principles for good assessment. That's almost ready to see the light of day, and you'll hear a little bit more about it later on, and be invited to be part of the discussion about how this gets moved on. So I'm not going to say anything more about that at the moment, but it will come back during the session. So some of the things that we're looking at are saying there's supposed to be a greater emphasis on interpretation. But mathematics have a tradition of very, very high reliability in marking mathematics exams. But if you're going to go for something which is more discursive, then you're moving towards the sort of humanities type of thing. And we're not talking about having 25-mark questions. You're talking about saying, okay, this part of the question is going to have 3 marks. And those 3 marks are going to be qualitatively not 1, 2, 3. But you would not, maybe you would. It would be nice for you not to believe just how big an obstacle that appears to be in terms of mathematics teachers and taking them out of their comfort zone. So that's a stumbling block at the minute, but we believe that that sort of interpretation needs to be a lot more discursive than it is. We think that assessment in statistics should use authentic data. There are times when we think it's appropriate to assess techniques without a context within a mathematics exam. But if you're putting it in the context, then it should be a meaningful context. And the motivation for the analysis should be clear. Too often we ask them questions where we say, do this, then they do nothing with it at all. And too often they're using artificially constructed data sets. There's an overarching theme of mathematical modelling. And statistics is inherently about modelling itself. And we believe that that should be much, much more front and centre of what's going on. Things like assessment of outliers should be a lot more nuanced. And there's still numerous cases where outliers are just discarded with absolutely no reference to why. Even when they are only just outliers. They're just discarded because, for no other reason other than they're outliers. Students should be asked to explain what they're doing and why. And if small samples are involved, there should actually be a reason why there's a small sample. As far as the pre-release large data set is concerned, we would like them to use a variety of large data sets so that they get used to working with data and and not be concentrating on facts about the context. I mentioned that before about not using the large data set to generate hypotheses and then test them from the data. That sort of thing really sends out very poor messages. In probability, you've got issues about how kids understand things and so on. So there are places where not having context is sensible, but sometimes, at the minute, you look at those and say that's actually really just a pure maths question, as opposed to you can ask questions. So, modelling was to be a broad theme. but it appears to be very limited. You can have the slides later on. There's a couple of background papers that give you more of the background. And I'm going to shut up before I get assaulted by the chair.
Thanks, Vince.
My name's Darren Macey. I'll give you a little bit of background about me, first of all, just to set the scene. So I was a secondary school teacher for just shy of 10 years. I left in 2014. Just to get a quick idea, has anyone in this room been a classroom teacher? A few people, interesting. Okay, so to set the scene, yeah. So I was a secondary teacher. I left that. I worked briefly on, in particular, the reformed A-level qualification that you just heard a little bit about. And then I started working for a project called Cambridge Maths. And that project is focused on trying to create tools to improve the reform of curriculum. So essentially to develop a framework that people can use for when they're making changes to curriculum to actually inform it using research and that kind of thing. It's quite a big project. And I got handed the statistics section of that framework. So statistics from 3 through to 19 is kind of my responsibility, which is fairly big and fits in with other colleagues who work on other topic areas. And when I got handed that, I didn't have any particular statistical background. So my imposter syndrome is in full swing at the RSS conference. Because I'm walking around with everybody who really knows what they're talking about at a very high level. And my background is quite different, I would say, to most people here. But having dropped statistics modules when I started university, I did some the ones I was forced to do in the first year of my undergraduate degree, and I didn't do any. And then coming back to it, being given responsibility for looking into research about stats education, I suddenly discovered that actually it's completely fascinating. And it's something that is incredibly and could be incredibly rich as an educational experience if it was done a little bit differently. So since then, I've been trying a lot more to think about how can we make some changes in schools, and particularly how can we give teachers agency to make those changes for themselves, because the large data set that James just spoke about was something that was kind of done to the exam boards to an extent, and then by extension, that gets done to the teachers in the classroom, and everyone has to adjust to it. So even though there are good intentions behind it, there's not much agency for the people in the classroom to be able to take those changes on and respond to them. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So I got involved in the RSS. I am an ambassador, one of the RSS stats ambassadors, along with Anthony, that I can spot there. I don't think there's anyone else in the room. And again, most of what they're doing is about supporting actual stats out in the world. And I've had to think about, well, how can I find a niche for myself as a not a statistician, but as a stats educator? And that's kind of what I want to talk about today. So, first thing first, looking at research around stats education, it's really interesting how much consensus there is around what good stats education looks like, what effective ways of teaching stats are. And you can go right back to the late 80s, early 90s, 1992. Those are a lot of material used by research from among others, that looks very much like these are recommendations from the Gaze College report in 2016. But you can look across hundreds and hundreds of people's papers with recommendations about how stats should be done. And you end up with seeing things that look very much like this. You know, variations on this theme, slightly different emphasis, and so on. But the same things come up: active learning, using real data, using technology where you can, focus on more concepts and less kind of recipes to follow through. All of that kind of thing is very, very common. And yet there doesn't seem to be much of a pipeline getting from these kind of recommendations into classrooms. And that's kind of an issue that we really need to think about, particularly as these have been there since, say, the early 90s and late 80s, but it's still not happening in classrooms. So what's the problem? Now, like I say, I was a teacher, so I don't want to stand here and bash teachers at all. I would certainly class myself as someone who didn't teach statistics well in school, but at the time I would consider myself as a reasonable teacher, I got good results, and the classes were able to answer the exam questions on statistics that were set in front of them. So by that metric, I was doing the job. But I'm not sure what value as a teacher of statistics I was actually giving students when I went back when I was a teacher. And so there's quite a number of problems in place. So I spend quite a lot of time trying to get the order of these right, but they're completely interconnected. So they also overlap with each other. So the key first one, the one that I sort of put at the top, is this pedagogical content knowledge. So that's not just understanding the statistics. There's often a push to get people from business and industry into classrooms to teach, because obviously they've got this high level knowledge and can convey that to students, but there's this whole layer of pedagogical content knowledge. So actually, not just how the mechanics of the thing you're teaching works, but how students understand that thing and how that thing needs to be broken down and made accessible, and the different methods and approaches you can take to that. So that's really important. And obviously to get that, there's a huge CPD invitation. You need the opportunities to reflect, to learn from others, to see good practice models, all that kind of thing. I put time at the bottom because I think it's actually the most important one. But CPD and time are very closely related. Teachers don't have the time to go and look at this stuff in detail and be reflective themselves, because they're jumping from one thing to another, and the pressures are great. Technology is another thing. There's lots of new packages that are out here. People in this room will use R, we use SPSS, all sorts of different things. Most of them haven't got to the classroom. The ones that do, but potentially changing all the time, people can only use a small amount of it, or people are scared to actually start using it because the learning curve can be quite steep. If we want to use real data, well, we need to be able to provide teachers with data, or teachers need to be able to find real data that is actually useful. There's really good free data sets out there, but half the time everything is coded, and you have to go somewhere else to find the codes of the columns, and so if you want to use that in a classroom, then you have to remake that data set somehow, or pull stuff out of it, and suddenly it becomes impossible because you get that to time again. And then quality of resources. Again, most teachers don't know that they're not teaching the stats particularly well. I certainly didn't when I was doing it. And so if you don't know, what you do is you go on the TES forums, for example, you go on their resource repositories, and you take resources from other teachers who also don't know that they're not teaching statistics particularly well, but it's quite an effective lesson in terms of being able to answer the exam question at the end of it. So everyone says, this is brilliant, and it goes around again. And then, I've said it a few times now, but all of these things interact with each other, and that's why there's this kind of pipeline problem. I've optimistically said solution. That's quite a wild claim. But this is one solution of essentially the work that I'm trying to do on this to hopefully make some kind of small difference and help as many teachers as possible. And so one of the things I was thinking as an ambassador for the RSS, as a member of the New Teaching Stats Special Interest Group, is there should be more that the RSS does to support good practice for teaching stats at that secondary level, to help generate that pipeline, to help to support teachers. As a teacher, it seems like a sensible place to go to the RSS to see if you can find some information. And there's some good pointers on the RSS website, there's a few position pages and things, it's all interesting stuff, but there's not that much there that is directly practical for a classroom at the moment. And so that's what I wanted to try and work on. And been having some discussions with the RSS, and in principle, we're going to try and get some of this stuff up, but it's still not finalised. So what I'm showing you today is very much a kind of work in progress, a proposal that is yet to be finalised in brief. So what are we trying to do? So first of all, which I'll show you in a second, is to redevelop some data visualisation software and some tasks that have been well trialled by Jim and by James and others at the Smart Centre. So there were some resources that were generated. I found it last night, originally coded in BASIC, that currently exist in kind of Flash animations that are still available on the web. But the data in them is well out of date now. The format is not always compatible. Lots of schools' computers don't run Flash particularly well, I know that from experience. And so they were in need of a bit of an update, and that coincided with me talking to James about things that I was trying to do. So he suggested we look at redeveloping these, and that's kind of turned into the project. The other thing that I want to do alongside that is try and come up with a set of key features of what makes a good quality teaching data set. So what is it when you're going out and looking for data sets as a teacher that you should be thinking about? What are those things? Is it a mix of qualitative, quantitative data? What sort of size? What sort of context? All this kind of thing. And then also to curate some examples of that as well from the Access website, either by links or by posting some data sets. Again, that's kind of detail yet to be explored further. And so in that way, there's a little package then to hopefully support teachers who are interested in improving their statistics practice and something that they can find easily. So to show you what we've done so far with the visualizer, has anyone seen this visualizer before? So this is in its current format. It's just a quick screenshot from the Flash file. I say the data at the moment on that particular one is GCSE results data from 2009, which is really interesting to play with. But as you can imagine, from a student perspective, from a motivation perspective, well, 2009 is kind of ancient history when chances are you're only 11, 12, 13 yourself, and that's kind of depressingly around the time you were born. One of the issues with this particular format of it is that it's kind of hard-coded, and so it's very difficult then to go and update. So one of the big changes that's been made, apart from the obvious formatting things, is it's now in HTML5 that uses CSV files, which means that it's actually very simple to make new instances of this visualizer as new data becomes available. So you can take the data introduced, do a little bit of formatting, put it into, basically upload it to a web space, and you'll get a new version of the visualizer with the latest data, and you can have several of these running for several years and so on. So there's some real flexibility to be added in here. So just to give you, let's see what the easy way to do this is, an example with moving, which is always quite interesting. He says hopefully. So it looks very similar. So this data is quite a nice example of the sort of data set that can work well with students, and so the resources are well trialed. The key thing here is you've got a mixture of the quantitative data, but also some qualitative features of the students sitting these exams. So you've got sex, ethnic group, and FSM's free school meals. And all of these tags can be swapped around, and the graph should update. So we can change the slider, so we're now seeing the data for the boys and the data for the girls. If I swap these two around, then gender is on the axis, and I can change the data by ethnicity. And so you can immediately start to see that for students exploring this kind of data, there are stories that start to appear within the data as you swap those axes around, as you move the slide into that. You start to spot interesting things. The context is very familiar to students. They understand exams, it's the world that they're operating in. And the really useful thing about this kind of thing is they never have to take their eyes off the graph in order to start thinking about these things. And it's one of the recommendations that comes from quite a few pieces of research, that this idea of focusing on the purpose of the axes and not looking away from the graph as you're conversing and exploring these things is a really, really powerful element of developing statistical knowledge in the classroom. Very happy if anyone wants to look at this in a little bit more detail and to have conversations with people around the place. So do feel free to start me and we can have a bit of this more, but I just have to wait. Then my time is nearly up. So if we go back. So, that's basically the plan. I hope to have the visualization and some other bits and pieces live on the RSS site once I've got agreement and approval from them. If not, we'll find somewhere else to host it and make sure that it is available to teachers. I should also say that the development of this, because obviously it does cost to get someone to do this coding. David Spiegelhalter was fantastic at finding a little bit of money so that we could pay a developer to actually produce this prototype. So that's been fantastic to get off the ground. The what next part? Well, obviously I'm going to continue to talk to the RSS and try and get this off the ground officially. There's a need to actually identify a handful of data sets to start off with that can be curated and people's attention can be drawn to. Sources of funding for further development is obviously another key thing. The more we can get, the more we can do with the whole set of resources available. And there's lots of ambitions that James and I have around making this more flexible, making it possible to put in your own data set potentially in the future and that kind of thing. So the kind of call to action is if anyone is interested in supporting this, either you can think of some company or business or group that you think might be interested in throwing some money to support this, then that would be useful to know for when we get to that point. If you know of any interesting data sets that you think would be good, that would be good to know. If you would like to be involved in the discussions around what makes a good data set for teaching in the classrooms, again, it would be great if you get in touch and potentially get a little group together to continue those discussions. That's my email address there. I've got cards as well if anyone wants to run off to me at the end of this. But I think that's me done for the moment.
I'm a freelance trainer now. It's statistics, Bayes, visualization, figure science. And before that I was a university lecturer, and before that I crunched hospital quality indicators and stuff like that. So my perspective on this is that I coach and train people now who are at some point on a data analysis career. They all went to school once upon a time. So we've got to think about this. Now, so what I'm going to try and do, I'm trying to be brief, but I'm thinking about how these exemplary ideas can actually be put out there so they influence and get some traction. Because we all know of great discussions that we've been involved in the past that great, but they haven't gone anywhere. They haven't influenced the decision-making policy makers. So let me try and stir things up along those lines. There's no doubt this is the age of data analysis. I only use this term data analysis, right? Because whether you come from a computer science background, you say you do machine learning, or you come from statistics, it doesn't really matter. We do data analysis a lot, and there is massive investment in data. This is uncontroversial. It's almost like an industrial revolution. I mean, technology and digital communications clearly is an industrial revolution, and the analysis of data to do that efficiently or make massive profits or whatever is a big part of that. So, economically, this really matters to the country. That we produce a workforce who might go on and participate in that, which I'm going to come back to. And I think it's one of the most fascinating and satisfying jobs in the world at present. And when I became a statistician, it was not considered fascinating or inspiring. It was considered very humdrum, and I was laughed at by my friends. But it's turned out to be a cool thing to do. And it's one of the most sought after jobs. So there are actually amazing career prospects for young people too, which is fantastic. And what we do day to day is we get some data. We don't typically go out with clipboards ourselves. We get some data and we consider the context in which it was collected and all the little quirks and the problems that might be lurking. We do so interactively, like Darren's been explaining. You look at it different ways, you visualize it, you get some summary statistic, you go, oh, this is a bit strapped, doesn't tie up with that, and you dig a bit deeper. So it's interactive, and you can't really do that with 10 pages of printout. And that is a serious challenge. I don't really know the answer to that, but we do interaction with it. And we consider the context of the question that's under investigation, and why the boss, the client, the audience wants to answer that question, whether that's actually the right question at all, actually. And sometimes we guide them to what they should be asking. And we can have the impact that our analysis will have on future decision making. So we frame it in a way that's actually useful to people. Now, all of this is contextual stuff, right? I haven't mentioned any adding or multiplication yet. And I think if we don't give young people a flavour of what that's about, then we're not really, we're doing them a disservice. Because there are usually multiple interpretations of the patterns you find in the numbers, you need to explain it to your audience. You need to be able to explain it clearly and professionally and fairly so that they can assess all the ifs and buts and the weaknesses in the data and the uncertainty and think about complete explanations. Now, none of these crucial aspects of our work appear in assessment in schools at present. That's the problem. So as much as we'd like to hope that it's not true, there's this old aphorism, almost carved in stone by William of Wickham or someone, that assessment drives learning. And I've had that said to me in gloating fashion by a lecturer colleague who did not want there to be reform of his course. Assessment driveth learning, or at least it drives the teaching, because you don't have the time to do the CPD and to think about the resources. The one thing you've got to do is to get the kids through the exams. So that's the problem. So we've got to get the assessment right. But we all agree on that, right? So I am strongly supportive of these recommendations that are falling. But we've got to bear in mind that we've got to get it out there in such a fashion that it gets some traction, so that it's exciting and so that it engages senior civil servants and politicians who will actually make it happen. And we're up against some opposition because there are only so many messages on assessment and education that they can absorb at one time. No offence. And the opposition we're up against is the thing that they respond to. The messages that are punchy, that are memorable, but most importantly, that are simple. And they hear the mantra again and again. And you've got to remember that your audience, in order to have impact out of this exercise, are people who've done all right in life. So they feel fairly positive about their school days. And their school days often were a long time ago. So the mantras that ring true to them are not the ones that we're saying. You know, schools are too soft. Exams are too easy nowadays. The teachers are all hippies. We must catch up with Singapore. It's always Singapore. We must bring back the good old days, which are rote learning, the 3 hours and all that. And of course, recently we're going to have reasonable force in the classroom. That's I have nothing further to say about that. I spent most of my childhood in South Africa. Actually, we had reasonable force. Anyway, your message needs to be as compelling as that. It needs to be as simple as that. So we've got to pitch it in such a way that it really appeals. It's an economic no-brainer. And then the message jumps over all the short words and gets right to the top. So we've got to fix statistics assessment, because then it will really turn the UK into a powerhouse for data, science, and AI and all sorts of things, which I think is genuinely true. And we need to get that message repeated by all the relevant maths and stats and teaching bodies, so they keep hearing it. So I suggest we try to frame this around that idea of a kind of an industrial revolution, that there's all this activity about to happen. The UK is well placed to be a leading centre for data science, and we're not really a leading centre for much anymore, so let's have a go with the data science side of things. And you can call it data analysis, machine learning, AI, whatever. If it's trendy and it gets people's attention, then fine. I don't mind. You call it AI, it's fine by me. But I think pitching it in those economic terms, in terms of producing an effective workforce, is going to be very memorable. When you had the previous industrial revolution, we needed lots of engineers, and we taught everyone, I say everyone, boys at grammar schools, calculus and trigonometry, right? And then some of them will go on and be engineers, which is true. And you've got to do the same thing now. You can't do it by going back in time. And even though that sounds right to your audience, we've got to convince them to go forward in time. That's all I'm going to say.
Okay, so we've deliberately not filled up the session so that we can have some conversations and sort of share some experiences around. And I'm delighted that Jochen Engel is here from Ludwigsburg, who's been directing a project which is close to the heart and the intention of what we would like to see happening in the UK. So, Jochen, would you like to just tell us a little bit about the resources that have been created?
Okay, over the last 3 years, or actually from 2015 to 2018, we were cooperating in a EU-sponsored partnership funded through the Erasmus program, and it was an intense cooperation, and we produced some theoretical frameworks. And for teaching practitioners, most important probably is that we created a lot of concrete teaching materials. And they align to what we saw earlier with the case recommendations, but with a particular focus, on, the project had been called promoting civic, it's about understanding statistics about society. What do people need to know in order to be informed as citizens and to be to get engaged and involved in decision processes? I mean, nowadays, highly important. Okay. I'm not now prepared for that, otherwise I would show you some of the materials and how you could access them.
You're doing a talk on
Okay,
tomorrow afternoon.
I'm giving a talk on Wednesday afternoon about that.
I think that one critical thing with it was that those resources were aiming to engage the business about questions of interest. One of the emphases was that students would look at policy implications. You know, what actually happened as a result of these things, and if you changed this policy, what would be the impact of it? So it has a particular relevance as far as what we've been talking about today, because of that focus. That it's about engagement with civic statistics, but particularly with implications for policy and how do you make things happen. And the whole business of unintended consequences is an integral part of that. Pro-civic stat, if you Google it, you'll see the resources are all freely available. And Jochen has a session tomorrow afternoon to show you some.
Yeah, the reason to talk about it is that there is if you just Google PCS ISLP, you'll get straight to the website, and there's a tool there that will let you search for different materials, including large data sets. So it's on topics like migration, poverty, inequality, gender imbalance. So they're all themed on civic issues. But it was really just to say that there are some teaching materials that are being developed, but I'm sure will need further work in this kind of local context. That you can see the kinds of stuff that's been done in the last few years. So generally, do people have questions for speakers? I mean, a very large range of themes we've talked about. So people sharing their experiences of using large data sets would be valuable. I think this whole theme about what's worth knowing and what are the big ideas. What is it about large data sets that moves us out of our comfort zones technically? So just how useful is the normal distribution of this so that it fits every situation you could ever dream of? You know, in a sense, we need to rock that just a teeny weeny bit without offending too many people. But you know, we're talking this, so really just be good for people to share ideas, comments, questions. Please.
Hi.
The other thing, please say who you are to start, so we can.
Hi, I'm Georgia Tasker-Davis. I'm working in the ONS. So I recently, last November, we've been working with the WJEC, the Welsh Joint Education Committee, obviously the main examining board in Wales. And we've predominantly been working with them because every child in Wales has to do a Welsh Baccalaureate A-level, and part of that A-level is an individual research project, which is quite high statistical content. So we've produced a resource which is now on the WJEC website, which guides an A-level student through from choosing the kind of project they would like to do, guiding them to our large data sets on the ONS website, and basically guiding them through exactly how to analyse and present that data. And that's since been adopted within WJC for psychology, and I think geography as well, because they all have statistical elements to those particular A levels. I'm just wondering whether this kind of focus that we're talking about, that support, is it just specifically for mathematics A levels, or is it encapsulating all of those other topics as well?
Very, very much part of what Darren was talking about, to have data sets that could be used in different places, and to have data sets that would be accessible for youngsters from sort of 11 up, to get them used to working with data in interesting contexts, in real context, but not just in mathematics. And I think a lot of the discussions about data science is a lot of the issues that appear in a lot of other subjects are now being talked about within the context of data science. I think in some cases people view data science as a magic bullet, and I'm not sure that they actually have a firm idea as to how to translate working with data into lots of different subject areas. But no, it's not intended to be a mathematics side. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really tricky one because I think it's actually part of the problem is that stats is a mathematical decision, and it's also not a mathematical decision. And to some extent, there's a decision, but do you put it in maths so that the maths part of it can be taught rigorously and properly, and make sure that people have the proper theoretical grounding, or do you put it out into other subjects so that people are actually seeing the application of it, making decisions and interpretation, there's all the context, and you're worrying less about that. And somewhere there's a balance there, but because there's no one in charge of that decision effectively, it all ends up in isolated little bits of good practice in places and nothing connects. But an awful lot of it really doesn't matter, and there's data that you can take, you can put the same data in any subject. So like one of my favourite graphs of the last couple of years when the first lot of data came up about the gender pay gap. The BBC had a fantastic graph of it where you had the different amounts of different and when you got to zero, there was this huge spike in the bar, and immediately, like, it doesn't. There's a question that jumps out of that straight away. You don't need any particular mathematical skills, but when you start thinking about what subject could that sit in and look at that data, there's a whole load of different places that can take that and do a really interesting lesson with a focus on the relevant part to a different subject. But people have got to be aware it's there. I think that's the real challenge.
There are two aspects of that from my experience. I've taught introductory statistics to various classes at universities from different disciplines. And the first point is that students resent data from disciplines that they don't really understand. So you give them some data from psychology and they don't know about psychology. And they can't just abstract the ideas of handling data. Second part, as has been said, they see statistics as part of mathematics. And in maths, you do sums and you get a right answer. So if you don't get the right answer, then you are wrong. And that is why it's very difficult to, as was said by many speakers, get students to think about what this data mean and eventually put things in context. I mean, when I've examined, I have given students pieces of computer output and asked them to interpret them. Nothing as trivial as just look at the value in a table. And before I shut up, I'll just put in a plug for the session we're doing tomorrow morning on Show Us the Stats, where we're talking about communication. And ultimately, if you've taught people how to do statistics well, they've got to communicate these answers to probably the other people who make the decisions, who have to therefore be informed as to what's going on. I'll just give a quick part, denial of this one. Talking about people seeing things as magic bullets, we have got a Prime Minister at the moment who has been for the past 6 months saying there was no problem with the Irish border, it can be solved with technology. Do it.
Thank you.
Yeah, please.
So I'm coming at this from quite a different angle. So I'm Laura from Northern Gas Networks, and the reason I'm here is I'm not a teacher, I'm a good teacher, but I've got quite an active interest in the STEMs, I'm a STEM ambassador. So really, for me, it's quite difficult going into a school and trying to know what to teach these kids and trying to know what to do with them. So I'm working as a statistician for a gas company, there's me that's there, so I've kind of got that more responsibility from that perspective. But knowing what's going on, what to talk to the children about, and to get there, the teachers just aren't prepared to which actually want to talk to them about. So I think it's very much two ways. We've got all this data, we're quite happy to share this data. There's reams and reams of tables we do every year for annual reporting. But in terms of knowing how we can support and how we can get in there and actually help teach the classroom, it's a little bit two-way thing. I feel like we're kind of a little bit of a blocking point. And yeah, I think the kind of organisations like the STEM ambassadors, like Rise, trying to bridge this gap, but we're not very successful at the minute. Yeah, we'll get your thoughts on how we can actually support you in doing this.
I think a lot of it is about starting conversations. It's identifying the audience. There's lots of groups of people trying to do good things, and there's lots of pockets of really good practice happening. It's how you start to link those up. One of the reasons why I wanted to try and use the sort of RSS ambassador thing I'm involved in to do something visible on education, to create some sort of focal point at a place that has a reputation where that focal point is then kind of instantly has some traction, I think. But maybe useful for a longer conversation.
I think that putting data in a form that people can play with immediately, which is what we're trying to do with the rotter. So people come to it and start asking questions. They ask questions because they're interested. You know, why is it true that girls always outperform the boys? Is there any interaction with ethnicity? Answer no. Is there any interaction with free school meals? No. So it's about the only thing you can say about that data set is that girls always outperform boys, no matter how you play around it. And then people then say, why is it the Chinese kids are achieving about, typically the Chinese group, you've got 10% more passes than any other ethnic group. What's happening? So you have a data set that people can play with, ask their own questions of, and then clearly that leads on to other kinds of questions. So at one level you can talk about the sort of statistical aspects of is that, how serious do you have to be about that difference? Is it worth worrying about, or is it just kind of a bit of foam on a stream? So,
one of the interesting things when we were working with these sorts of data sets with kids in schools was that you were mentioning the right answer syndrome. Actually, for a lot of kids who were really, really poor at maths, working with these quite complicated data sets on things like youngsters' use and abuse of alcohol gave them freedom because it was entirely obvious to them that there couldn't be a single right answer. And therefore, they were happy to start talking about it and saying, why this, why that, but they could make descriptions about even things like interactions. You know, they could see patterns, they could see that the age, different ages made a bigger difference than the differences between boys and girls, but they could also say that the pattern had changed over time, which is what an interaction is. So they could do it. I mean, for all of the very weak kids, their grammar and their articulation was maybe a little bit less than you might like. They certainly weren't using technical descriptions, but they had some quite sophisticated statistical ideas, and they were engaged with it, despite the fact that the next day they would go back into the mathematics classroom and not be able to get a single right answer to any of the calculations. So there are opportunities for things like this in terms of contexts that that pose questions about why. I mean, for the Chinese, why are they the one group where there's almost no impact on being eligible for free school meals? So if it's not actually a poverty thing, is it to do with nutrition? Is it to do with, you know, the Chinese don't have to spend a lot of money in order to eat healthily, or what's the reason for them? And there are lots of places in which those sorts of data visualizations raise questions that provoke why. And that's, you know, Darren was talking about the technical things about it being in front of you and it changing dramatically in front of you. The bottom falls out of some of the performances with the free school meals, but it doesn't really.
But pupils who just talked about, who are articulating the right ideas, from what you said, aren't they then going to go back into the exam system and be failing?
Yeah, and that's largely what we want to do something about.
It's got to be done, though.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're stuck with certain things, but I think there are aspects of what goes on within assessment that are not necessary. I think we compound some of the difficulties by the sorts of examples. I don't think there's any excuse for the sort of examples that I showed earlier on. That's just rank bad and not necessary. And it really compounds the issues about teacher confidence, which I think is a huge issue.
I think we should be looking forward to the next curriculum reform and really start working about how can we actually improve this. Assess coursework at the A level seems like a sensitive. For me, it seems like a sensitive.
Yeah.
Same for the stats element, right? It seems crazy to try and assess someone's statistical ability via an exam question. It's just
that was all that political will about, is it the parents doing it or the kids doing it, and you know all that screw happens around.
which is why we've gone for this high stakes all exam based. I don't think it's really testing the skills that we're trying to find out about.
It's that validity.
But if you did it for 20%, or I mean, you don't, and the sciences are doing it with logbooks, and now they have controlled assessments, and so there are
I think that's
mechanisms.
right. You need to look for better mechanisms.
Yeah.
So the control assessments where you have stuff done in certain time periods.
And I know, I think I had a conversation with Jenny Golding at UCL, and she was saying now that the science ones have been quite well received with the logbooks for other science subjects. So if they can do it for those, why not for statistics?
There's other models as well. I think one of the things that I kind of regret as an opportunity missed from when I was working on the A level is so MEI have a unit in their further maths which is called further technology, where the students are doing a traditional paper-based exam, but they have a computer that has contrived system stuff on it, which they interact with during the exam. So it's traditional format, can be marked in a traditional way, all of that is fine, but you have this tool. And in hindsight, there's no reason why you couldn't do something similar with statistics assessment.
But I think there are resource issues for that, which is why, if you look at the share that EdXL have, and I know that when they looked at that for their first maths, I think that was a big no-no because there just not many of the schools are able, as well. It's how do you get those resource issues?
If boys
I know
are
it's
offering
chicken
it,
egg,
people don't do it.
100%. But having everybody, you just can't provide the lab space. It's tricky.
Okay, dealing with and understanding these multivariate phenomena that we are addressing here requires very different skills and dispositions and knowledges than what's used, let's say, in a technical oriented mathematics classroom. And oftentimes it's a big achievement if students learn to ask good questions about it. Critical thinking is very important. And if they ask good questions and are motivated and engaged in exploring these questions and from different perspectives, look at the data from various perspectives. You will not get a clear right and wrong answer, but you may discover a trend that forms your position, that helps you to support a conviction that you may have.
And an interesting skill adjunct to that is, especially when you think about this sort of civic issue data sets, is to realise when you come up against the limits of what you can tell from the data. So, explanations keep bubbling up. The Chinese pupils are eating lots of healthy vegetables and other. And you go, but I don't have any data on that, so I need to stop making up this nonsense at this point until we know more, which is an extremely valuable skill for citizens to be able to respond.
There's a lovely data set about mathematics and performance of mathematics that I use with professional development courses on the basis of saying, and use it with kids to say, maths is the easiest A level, because if you look at the data, more kids get A's than any other grade in maths, and it's the only subject that A is the golden grade. There's a higher percentage of A's in maths than in any other subject, so maths is obviously the easiest A level. And the kids and teachers, if it's in a professional, they fall about laughing, saying, ridiculous. Oh, okay. Maths teachers are obviously brilliant. And the kids really fall about laughing. And the teachers, to be fair, also fall about laughing. And you say, well, what is the reason? And basically, and this is where you can distinguish between these. If you look at the grades at GCSE on entry to do A-level maths, on average, the kids doing A-level maths have a 1 grade higher GCSE score. So it's the best kids going, because only the best kids can cope with it. So you've got different plausible explanations, but there is actually a way of telling the difference between them, and that sort of thing is really important in terms of getting kids to understand the notion of you don't just come up with a speculative reason. It may give you an avenue for further exploration to see what is the reason that the Chinese don't. It could be to do with nutrition, it could be to do with the social environment, the emphasis that they put on education, but you don't know until you do some more work.
So again, just putting together what Nicholson and Roberts are saying, these things are asking good questions, and people, and the work that James was talking about, that we're looking at kids' understanding of data and alcohol. What we asked them to do was they had to, we've got some newspaper headlines like UK hit by booze girls crime wave. Okay. And they had to either write a letter to the editor or make a video of the interactive data viz. And then what we did was to mine it for the statistical ideas. Well, the interesting thing was that kids would sometimes just go and get other data sets and pull out, just actually go into the web and actually use reasoning based on stuff they found that wasn't the stuff we given them. So this asking good questions, actually wanting to explore more, is where we want to get to